It's 5:41 in the morning local time, and the flight deck of an American aircraft carrier is already humming with motion. Yellow shirts moving between parked jets, a tow tractor clearing lanes along the starboard edge, two Super Hornets sitting nose out near the bow, with their wings folded and locked, fuel lines disconnected, waiting for the next launch cycle to begin, and deep below them, buried inside the steel labyrinth of the ship, Combat Information Center is running routine surface and air tracks through the last quiet minutes before dawn fully breaks, when suddenly one voice cuts through the tactical net with words that turn routine into razor focus. Fast movers, 3 contacts bearing 038, low altitude, closing fast. Nobody on the bridge reacts with panic because panic is not what American carrier crews are trained to do. They react with precision. The officer of the deck turns toward the tactical repeater and sees 3 symbols that have just appeared on the outer edge of the screen, faint at first but then steady, moving fast, too fast for patrol traffic, too low for routine transit, no identification beacon, no response to radar interrogation, no radio call on any frequency, and the carrier maintains its course for exactly 2 more seconds before the order comes through calm and clear, set heightened alert, track them all the way in. Inside Combat Information Center, the Air Warfare Coordinator leans closer to his console as fresh data begins pouring in from the E-2D Hawkeye, orbiting farther south over the Gulf, and the picture sharpens immediately. 3 aircraft with military profiles, tight spacing, descending slightly as they close, and their route is not parallel to the strike group, it is pointed directly at it. A second voice, colder than the first, confirms what everyone in the room already suspects: possible Iranian fighters. On the flight deck, the changes are subtle but instant. Deck movement tightens. A flight director snaps one arm overhead and points maintenance personnel away from exposed lanes. A firefighting team shifts toward standby positions. Ordnance crews stop talking mid-sentence, and the roar of jet engines in the distance grows louder, but not from the carrier's own deck, from somewhere out over the water. From the east, and from the island, the captain steps onto the bridge wing and looks toward the horizon where nothing is visible yet, just a pale strip of dawn over the Strait of Hormuz and the flat metallic shine of morning light on the water, and behind him the tactical speaker cracks again. Range decreasing, contacts now at 82 miles, speed high, no communications. The destroyers screening the carrier group have already moved ahead of the moment. Their Aegis arrays are tracking, their intercept geometry is calculating. Every console in the formation is now solving the same problem from a different angle. And no one says the word attack, not yet. But the carrier is no longer operating in routine transit mode. It is operating inside a narrowing clock where every second matters and every decision counts. And at 5:43, the Hawkeye pushes a clearer readout that shows one aircraft climbing slightly above the other 2, while the formation stretches. The lead pair continue low, cutting through the warm air just above the sea, using the surface clutter to complicate the radar picture and shorten warning time, while the third aircraft hangs back higher and cleaner like an eye above the strike, watching everything unfold. In Combat Information Center, a watchstander calls it exactly as it looks. Split formation, 2 low, 1 offset high. This is deliberate, and the bridge-to-bridge circuit opens on the emergency guard frequency with a calm but unmistakable transmission. Unidentified military aircraft approaching United States naval formation in international waters. This is U.S. Navy warship. State your intentions immediately, and there is only silence in response. The call is repeated with the same result. Nothing but the soft electronic hiss of an open channel, and the steady collapse of distance as the 3 contacts continue inbound, with no acknowledgement and no explanation. On the flight deck, a crew chief looks up just as the first shape appears beyond the bow. Small and dark and fast, there for barely a second before it vanishes behind heat shimmer and glare. Then the second one flashes into view farther right and lower still, hard over the water, and no one mistakes what they are now: Iranian fighters, and the ship does not lurch or break formation or throw the crew into a frenzy, because that is not how an American carrier answers pressure. It answers with control. Secure exposed deck operations comes the order. Stand by defensive systems, vector CAP back in, and far above the carrier 2 American fighters already airborne begin turning hard back toward the formation, while farther out a cruiser tightens its radar track and updates weapon solutions it may never need to fire, because this is what the strike group is built to do. See first, sort fast, respond without chaos. At 5:44, one of the Iranian fighters drops even lower and accelerates. the motion unmistakable as its nose aligns, not with the open sea but with the carrier's forward quarter. And in Combat Information Center, every headset goes quiet for half a heartbeat before a warning tone cuts through the compartment. A narrow beam has just swept the formation. Not broad search radar, but something tighter, sharper, more focused. And the electronic warfare operator turns to his supervisor and says in a flat voice, "We're getting emissions." Another sweep hits longer this time, and the operator doesn't raise his voice when he adds, "Possible track mode." On the bridge, the captain never looks away from the horizon. "He's painting us," he says quietly. "Do not break posture." And below him, the deck crew hold where they are, with helmets tilted skyward, listening to the distant growl getting louder by the second, as the first jet closes inbound on a line too clean to dismiss, the second sliding wide to starboard, the third remaining back and high exactly where a controller or spotter would want to be. And this is no accidental pass. This is a shaped approach with intent behind every movement. And at 5:45 local time, the lead Iranian fighter cuts across the morning haze and drives straight toward the carrier group at attack speed. And inside Combat Information Center, the next alert appears on every screen at once. The first Iranian fighter is no longer approaching, it is committing. From the carrier's island, the jet is now visible through the haze as a hard dark shape skimming just above the waterline, with its nose steady and speed increasing. Off its right, farther out and slightly wider, the second fighter begins to arc into position, while the third remains high and offset, holding enough altitude to watch the whole geometry unfold. 3 aircraft, 3 angles, 1 target, and inside Combat Information Center, the tactical display updates in rapid silent bursts, showing range-bearing altitude closure rate, and the numbers are collapsing fast. Lead contact now 46 miles. Second contact offset starboard. Third contact maintaining high cover. And nobody wastes words because nobody needs to. On the bridge, the captain keeps his posture unchanged, with his hands flat on the rail and eyes forward, while behind him the air warfare coordinator's voice comes up over the net. Formation pattern confirms intent. This is not a transit. This is pressure geometry. And the carrier strike group responds exactly the way it was built to respond. Ahead of the carrier, one destroyer shifts slightly outward, opening its defensive angle. Another tightens its position aft of the starboard quarter. A Ticonderoga-class cruiser farther back locks the 3 contacts into a cleaner radar picture and pushes refined tracks across the network, and Aegis systems are now fully awake across the formation, solving engagement sequences down to fractions of seconds, while vertical launch cells remain closed for now. But every ship in the screen is already prepared to fire. At 5:46, the emergency frequency opens again, with the same calm, authoritative transmission. Iranian military aircraft approaching United States naval formation. You are closing unsafely. Alter course immediately. The message goes out in English, then again on military guard, but there is no reply. No call sign, no acknowledgement, no warning of their own. Only silence and speed. And on the flight deck, the transition is now complete. Tow vehicles are off the lanes. Exposed crews have been pulled back. Fire teams kneel behind protected positions. Ordnance handlers stand by under the island overhang, with helmets tilted upward, listening to the sound of engines building over the water. And above them, the carrier's island sensors are tracking every movement, every sweep, every second of closure. In Combat Information Center, the electronic warfare operator stiffens and says, "We've got emissions again," and the room narrows around that sentence as the first sweep is brief, the second is stronger, the third stays on just a fraction longer than a search radar should, and the operator turns toward his supervisor without taking his eyes off the scope. Lead aircraft is tightening beam width, possible fire control behavior, and that changes the room not into panic but into sharper discipline, as an officer on the far side of Combat Information Center gives the next order. Mark time, record all emissions, build the profile. Because this is the other side of a confrontation at sea. Every aggressive move is also a signature. Every radar sweep, every communications burst, every angle of approach is data. And the closer the Iranian aircraft come, the more they reveal. But that matters later. Right now, what matters is distance. Lead contact 33 miles. The fighter closest to the carrier drops lower still, so low that from the bridge it seems to disappear in the glare between wavetops. The second aircraft widens farther to starboard positioning, itself not behind the first but slightly displaced enough to divide visual attention and force the outer escorts to account for 2 potential attack axes at once. And high above them, the third fighter turns just enough to stay outside the most dangerous part of the envelope, watching, relaying, controlling. At 5:47, the first American fighters begin to re-enter the picture. Two U.S. Navy jets already airborne on combat air patrol bank, hard back toward the strike group, with their vector updated mid-turn by the E-2D Hawkeye. They are still minutes out, but no longer distant, and their return changes the clock for everyone because the Iranians know it, and so does the carrier. One of the destroyers ahead of the formation now reports firm weapon solutions on the two low contacts. Another confirms track continuity on the high aircraft. And inside the cruiser's Combat Information Center, the tactical action officer reviews possible intercept windows if a missile leaves a rail. Still no launch, still no shot, still the same American discipline. Do not escalate first, but be fully ready to finish it if the other side does. At 5:48, the lead Iranian fighter climbs just slightly, only enough to stabilize its line, and then noses back down toward the carrier's forward quarter. And that tiny adjustment tells the whole story. It is not maneuvering randomly. It is setting up, and on the bridge, one watch officer says what everyone is now thinking. He's lining up for a run, and the second fighter responds immediately, tightening its own arc on the starboard side, not close enough to strike yet, but close enough to force the escorts to divide their attention while the high aircraft keeps station above and behind, exactly where a controller would want to remain if coordinating the timing. And this is no longer intimidation by presence alone. This is an attack profile. The emergency frequency opens one final time. Iranian military aircraft alter course now. You are entering an unsafe and escalatory posture toward United States naval forces, but there is nothing in response, no answer, only the lead fighter dropping into a cleaner line faster now, with its nose fixed and altitude razor low, heading locked toward the carrier group as if the entire sky has narrowed to one point, and inside Combat Information Center the radar picture tightens. The electronic warfare board lights again, and then a new call cuts across the compartment. Possible targeting radar, lead aircraft committing, and at 5:48 local time the distance has collapsed, the formation is set, and every ship in the strike group knows the same thing at once. This is no longer an intercept, it is an attack profile. At 5:49 local time, the first shot comes without a word, inside Combat Information Center. The warning doesn't sound like panic, it sounds like confirmation. Spike, spike, lead contact has gone hard track, and a beat later another voice cuts across the compartment. Possible release? And on the bridge, nobody asks what that means because everybody knows. The lead Iranian fighter has stopped posturing. It is no longer shaping pressure, it is executing. Low over the water with its nose fixed on the carrier group's forward quarter. It holds its line just long enough to complete the run, and then for a fraction of a second its profile changes. Small, almost invisible, unless you are already looking for it. The weapon leaves the rail. Missile away, inbound fast mover from lead aircraft. The call hits every circuit in the strike group at once, and the entire formation moves before the words are finished. Ahead of the carrier, the nearest destroyer does not hesitate. Its Aegis system has already solved the intercept. Hatches open, a missile punches vertically into the dawn, and rolls hard toward the threat with its motor burning white against the pale sky. Farther aft, the cruiser's radar locks tighter, refining track quality on both the inbound weapon and the two remaining Iranian fighters. And the carrier itself does not break into chaos, it tightens. Flight deck crews flatten behind protected positions. Fire teams brace low. The officer of the deck holds course for one more measured second before a controlled heading change begins. Small and deliberate, just enough to complicate the inbound geometry without throwing the formation into disorder. And that is the difference between panic and training. One loses structure, the other preserves it under fire. At 5 hours 49 minutes and 18 seconds, electronic warfare kicks like a second nervous system across the strike group. Jamming floods outward, decoys arm, countermeasure teams stand by for the next order, and on the destroyers close-in defense crews track the inbound line with the cold focus of repetition. Every screen now shows the same problem. One weapon sea-skimming fast and closing, and above the formation the two American fighters returning on combat air patrol receive immediate authority to commit, but they do not dive toward the missile. They go for the shooters. The first U.S. jet angles toward the lead Iranian aircraft from high port quarter. The second turns wide to cut off the starboard fighter that has been shadowing the run from the side, and the third Iranian aircraft, still high and offset, now has to decide whether to stay in control position or brake to survive, and that decision is already late. Back at sea level, the first intercept is seconds away, destroyer engaging, and no one on the bridge sees the actual impact clearly because it happens too fast and too low. 1 second there is a hard white line racing over the water. The next there is a bright rupture just above the surface, a violent bloom of flame and debris followed by spray lifting into the morning air like a wall of shattered glass. Splash one, first inbound destroyed. And there is no cheering, not yet, because almost immediately another problem appears. The second Iranian fighter has tightened its angle on the starboard side, forcing the escorts to account for a possible follow-up attack. And for one brief dangerous moment the strike group has to fight two clocks at once. The debris field of the first intercept falling toward the sea, and the possibility that the second shooter is now inside release parameters. The electronic warfare board lights again, additional emissions from starboard fighter, and that gets everyone's attention. The destroyer off the carrier's starboard quarter slews its sensors and opens a new track solution. The cruiser behind the formation adds another layer. The Hawkeye above it all keeps feeding the picture clean and continuous tying fighter ships' radar and intent into one moving map. And this is what the Iranians came to break. And this is exactly what they failed to break, because at 5:50 the second fighter dips, but not cleanly. Its line is unstable now. The first American CAP jet is already descending into its 6 o'clock, close enough to pressure far enough to hold discipline. No missile leaves the rail, no warning shot is fired. The US pilot doesn't need theatrics. Position is enough, speed is enough, the message is enough. You got one shot, you don't get another. The starboard Iranian fighter breaks its line hard. It rolls away from the carrier group and drags low across the edge of the formation, trying to exit without showing too much retreat. The high aircraft reacts a second later, finally losing the detached posture it had held since the first approach. It banks left, shedding altitude, no longer controlling the geometry but trying to escape it. And only the lead fighter, the one that fired, holds straight for a moment longer, and that moment tells the entire story. It is no longer attacking, it is running. And the first American fighter stays locked behind it, closing the angle but not crossing the line, while the second cap jet now owns the space the starboard fighter just abandoned. And down below, every escort in the strike group maintains weapons quality track on all three aircraft, because if any one of them turns back, and the answer will be immediate. At 5 hours 50 minutes and 41 seconds, the last fragments of the destroyed missile slap into the sea astern of the formation. The carrier is still moving. Its deck is scarred only by tension, not impact. Its escorts are still in formation. Its fighters are now above the threat instead of racing toward it. And the men who launched the attack have just lost the only advantage they had. And inside Combat Information Center, the Air Warfare Coordinator looks at the board, then says it flat. Iran fired first, attack failed, all units maintain pressure, and out over the Strait of Hormuz, the geometry has changed completely. The carrier group is no longer bracing for the strike, it is turning the trap around. At 5:51 local time, the attack is over, but the danger is not. Out over the strait, the three Iranian fighters are still airborne, still armed, and still inside a battle space they no longer control. 2 minutes earlier, they had come in fast, low, and coordinated, trying to compress the carrier group into a defensive crouch. Now the geometry has flipped. The US Navy is no longer reacting to their timing. The Iranians are reacting to American position, and inside Combat Information Center, the tactical screen has changed shape completely. The inbound missile track is gone, burned out over the water. In its place are three air contacts moving away from their original attack lanes, each on a slightly different vector, each forced off the clean lines they had used on the way in. One high, two low, none stable. Lead shooter is accelerating east, starboard fighter breaking south, high cover descending. Looks like they're trying to reform, and the Air Warfare Coordinator doesn't look up when he says, "Don't let them reform." That order moves across the strike group like current through steel. Above the carrier, the two American cap fighters now own the sky the Iranians tried to use. The first US jet stays on the lead shooter's rear quarter, high enough to threaten, far enough to preserve control. The second slides wide and down, sealing off the fighter that broke south after losing its attack line. And neither American pilot rushes the intercept because neither needs to. The point is no longer to chase. The point is to box them in, and at sea level the escorts hold the lower half of the trap. A destroyer ahead of the carrier maintains firm radar track on all three aircraft. Another on the starboard quarter adjusts only slightly enough to widen its defensive umbrella and deny any quick turn back toward the formation. And the cruiser astern remains cold and methodical, feeding a continuous engagement quality picture into the network. No gaps, no confusion, no second chance. At 5:52, the lead Iranian fighter makes its first real mistake after the launch. Instead of continuing a clean exit, it pulls hard left, trying to shake the American jet riding its rear quarter and angle back toward the center of the formation's outer screen. It is a move made under pressure, too sharp, too visible, and exactly what the US Navy wants. The American pilot doesn't fight on speed, he fights on position. He holds high, cuts the angle, and forces the Iranian fighter lower, closer to the layer where ship radars track best and escape corridors shrink fastest. The move is clean, quiet, professional. No radio dramatics, no warning burst. Just a controlled squeeze of airspace until the Iranian aircraft has only two options left: extend away or fall deeper into the envelope, and it chooses away. Lead contact, aborting turn, extending east. On the second track, the southern fighter tries a different answer. It dumps altitude, rides low across the heat shimmer above the sea, and throws out a short burst of flares, not because a missile is chasing it, but because the pilot is feeling the pressure and wants to break visual rhythm, break lock, logic, break something. But it changes nothing. The second American fighter holds outside the flare, bloom matches the break, and keeps the Iranian jet pinned away from the carrier group's starboard side. And below them, the destroyer tracking that sector never loses contact, because this is what the Iranians failed to account for. A US aircraft carrier is not one ship. It is a moving grid of sensors, fighters, radars, and command nodes that overlap until there is nowhere useful to hide. At 5:53, the third Iranian fighter, the one that had stayed high and back through most of the attack run, finally loses its detached posture. It drops altitude and banks toward the other two, clearly trying to pull the formation back together for a controlled exit. But the moment it descends, it gives away the one thing it had preserved: separation. And the Hawkeye updates first, then the cruiser, then both American fighters get the same revised picture. The high cover is no longer high cover, it is just a third exposed aircraft moving into a sky already owned by someone else. Third contact now vulnerable, and the words are simple, but the effect is not. One American jet shifts just enough to show presence on the descending fighter's flank, not an attack, not a dive, just enough closure and angle to make the message unmistakable: you're done here. And the Iranian pilot reacts instantly. Nose comes up, bank reverses, altitude returns, the rejoin attempt collapses before it is fully formed. And inside Combat Information Center, the result is obvious even before anyone says it out loud. The three fighters are no longer a strike package. They are three separate aircraft trying to leave the same bad decision by different routes. At 5:54, the strike group tightens the pressure one last notch. No missiles fired, no dogfight, no dramatic roll into open combat, just American fighters overhead, destroyers below, the cruiser behind, the Hawkeye above them all, and nowhere for the Iranians to rebuild the attack they came in with. The lead shooter continues east. The southern fighter drifts farther off the carrier's line. The third aircraft stays high, hesitant for 1 second too long, then finally turns with the others. And that hesitation says everything. They came in hunting a carrier. Now they are leaving in pieces. And in the center of it all, the carrier keeps moving unbroken, still generating combat power, while the sky above Hormuz belongs to the US Navy again. At 5:55 local time, the sky over the Strait of Hormuz is no longer contested. It is controlled, not because the Iranian fighters have been destroyed, not because the carrier group fired everything it had, not because the sea is littered with wreckage. None of that happened. What happened was worse for the attackers. They failed. Out ahead of the formation, the lead Iranian fighter continues east at high speed, no longer shaping an attack lane, no longer holding a clean line, no longer part of a coordinated strike package. The second aircraft remains low and wide to the south, separated by distance and pressure. The third stays high for a few seconds longer, then turns with the others, abandoning the last trace of the geometry they had brought in with them. And inside Combat Information Center, the tactical display tells the whole story in clean symbols. 3 hostile contacts, all moving away, all tracked, none in position to re-engage, and the air warfare coordinator studies the board for 1 more second, then gives the order the entire strike group has been waiting for. Maintain track, hold the screen, prepare to resume flight operations. And that is the moment the balance becomes unmistakable. The carrier was attacked. The carrier is still launching. At 5:56, the 2 American fighters overhead do not chase recklessly, they shadow. One stays high on the lead shooter's rear quarter, preserving pressure without crossing the line into a kill sequence. The second continues to own the southern lane, making absolutely certain no Iranian pilot gets the idea to swing back for one last desperate run. The Hawkeye orbit remains steady, feeding a continuous picture to every ship in the formation, and below them destroyers and cruiser keep full radar quality track. Every bearing change logged, every turn stored, every emission captured. And this is not revenge, this is dominance through control. And on the flight deck, the shift is just as telling. Crew chiefs move first, then handlers, then yellow shirts. The pause that began when the missile left the rail is over. Catapult crews return to stations. A tow tractor rolls again. A flight director snaps both arms outward, guiding a waiting jet into line with calm, practiced precision. Fire teams remain in place, but the posture has changed. The deck is no longer braced for impact. It is regenerating combat power. And that image matters more than any explosion because this was the whole point of the attack. The Iranian fighters didn't come in just to fire a missile. They came in to interrupt the carrier's rhythm, to freeze the deck, to force confusion, to prove that even an American flat top in Hormuz could be shoved off balance. And they failed at every level. At 5:57, the first launch crew reports ready. The bridge stays quiet. The captain does not make a speech because he does not need to. He watches the horizon where the Iranian fighters are now shrinking into distance and gives a short nod toward the flight deck status repeater, resume cycle, and that order lands with more weight than any threat on the radio, because moments later steam hisses. A US Navy fighter surges down the catapult track and slams into the morning sky. Then another, not in retreat, not in panic, not as an emergency scramble, as part of a restored launch rhythm. And that is the answer. 3 Iranian fighter jets attack a US aircraft carrier in Hormuz. Minutes later, the carrier is still generating sorties. Inside Combat Information Center, the aftermath is already being built into data. Electronic warfare teams replay radar sweeps from the Iranian approach. The timing of the fire control behavior is isolated. The missile release point is marked. The split formation profile is saved. Communications officers note the absence of warning calls, the silence on guard, the precise second when the attack shifted from intimidation to release. And intelligence specialists will study all of it later. How the Iranians approached, how they spaced, how they coordinated, where they hesitated, when they broke. And that is the second defeat. The first was tactical. The second is permanent, because every aggressive move they made is now part of an American library. At 5:58, the lead cap fighter reports the Iranian aircraft continuing outbound. No reversal, no attempt to regroup, no second run. The southern contact remains separated. The high aircraft is now just another retreating symbol on a screen full of American certainty. The strike group never lost formation. The carrier never lost the deck. The escorts never lost the picture. And the men who came in expecting shock achieved only exposure. And out on the bridge wing, the morning finally looks like morning again. Sunlight cuts across the water. Wake trails settle into long white lines behind the ships. The strait is still narrow, still dangerous, still one of the most volatile waterways on Earth. But for this 8-minute stretch, the question of who controlled it was answered clearly. Not by rhetoric, by performance. No grand victory call follows, just procedure, logs updated, tracks maintained, cap adjusted, deck cycle restored. And this is how the US Navy closes a fight when it refuses to be rattled. Not with noise, but with continuation. And that may be the part that hits hardest. Because the Iranian pilots came in thinking they were about to change the day, and they did, just not in their favor. So here's the question: should the US respond even harder when a carrier is directly attacked? Or is this exactly why American naval discipline is so hard to break? Drop your take in the comments. Because in Hormuz that morning, 3 Iranian fighter jets attacked a US aircraft carrier. Then this happened. The carrier kept launching aircraft, and Iran was the one falling back.